The first movies were silent. They only featured music. Sometimes played by a pianist, in larger venues, a full orchestra. Over the years, sound was invented, and it evolved. New sounds were crafted, and dialogue, once shouted over the sound of loud cameras,
No, David, if we'd had a bathhouse, why, this wouldn't have been so complicated.
Next time I'll try and arrange one.
became quieter as microphones improved.
What is this?
What is what?
Are we getting back together?
So how did all of this come to be? To understand the journey, we need to go back to the very beginning. I'm Chris, lead trainer here at Film Editing Pro. Sound design is hands down my favorite part of editing, and when you look at how sound in film has evolved into the tools we now take for granted, you start to realize how much power we actually have. In 1888, Thomas Edison was one of the founding architects of motion pictures with his invention of the kinetograph. He said, "I am experimenting upon an instrument which does for the eye what the phonograph does for the ear, which is the recording and reproduction of things in motion." The first films to ever be shown to audiences began in the late 1890s. The films were silent. Filmmakers around the world were trying their hand at creating picture and sound together, but the most common way audiences would see films would be with a live musical accompaniment. Some early moving pictures included a recording, such as 1913's Jack's Joke, or 1907's Poor John and Waiting at the Church.
I'm in a nice bit of trouble, I confess. Somebody with me.
Edison was very concerned with closely synchronizing the sound and the picture. However, limitations in technology and available staffing at movie houses made it sporadic, with only the biggest theater chains attempting synchronization. It wouldn't be until 1914 that D.W. Griffith's presentation of The Birth of a Nation would play with a full symphony orchestra that was closely synchronized and relied on consistent leitmotifs or musical themes. Unlike previous filmmakers of his time, Griffith is considered one of the first American directors to maintain careful control over the selections and distribution of the musical accompaniment for his film. Theaters would commonly adjust the speed of the projector and even remove scenes from films at their own discretion, while musicians would create music of their choosing to go along with the images on the screen. An audience in Chicago would not be seeing the same exact film as an audience in New York. The mid-1920s would see the invention of the phonofilm. It was critically panned because it sounded like a phonograph, which sounds like this. In 1926 would see the invention of the Vitaphone.
The introduction of the Vitaphone has been received both by the public and the artistic world with a great deal of interest and favor,
which was used to record the audio for Warner Brothers' feature film Don Juan. While better than the phonofilm, audiences still felt like the audio on the Vitaphone paled in comparison to live music. However, the writing was on the wall for musicians, organists, pianists, and the other theatrical players as the tides were turning and technology was advancing. In 1927, The Jazz Singer was released, which was the first commercially successful film to feature synchronized sound.
Wonderful pals are always hard to find.
Audiences loved the film and the presentation of synchronized audio, making it a huge success. Studios heard the message loud and clear, and thus the term Talkies was coined. Studios began to rapidly adopt synchronized sound, and by the early 1930s, it had become the standard for all films. Though audiences were keen on seeing more films with sound, problems arose during film productions. Technical limitations from early microphones caused several problems. They were limited in their range, large and difficult to move around, and they were often concealed in a single location on the set. These early microphones were often omnidirectional, meaning they would pick up every noise on set, not just the actors' voices. Loud camera motors were problematic, thus cameras and camera operators were enclosed inside of a box. As such, early movies looked like this.
You know, I believe you're jealous.
You believe I'm jealous? And why shouldn't I be of the prettiest girl in the world? You know, someday, I'm going to have a nightclub all of my own.
You can see that the actors here are standing in one position, often near where a microphone could easily be hidden, and neither the actors nor the camera are moving. The quality of the audio can have a tinny effect to it, sounding as if you were hearing it through a tin can. Nowadays, the term we know as ADR, or Automated Dialogue Replacement, was then known as looping. It was used heavily in the 1930s and beyond to record audio after the production had completed and attempt to sync it to the picture. Today, this is made much simpler by digital technology, but in the early days of film, this was done by a mechanical process, where the picture and the associated audio tracks were cut into equal-length loops. Since they were looped, during playback they would repeat over and over again. After achieving a good read and sync, they would pull the film and audio off the recorder and thread up a new loop. That meant you had a lot of film laying around. Loops needed to be a minimum of 6 feet long, up to approximately 150 feet, to avoid the film getting tangled in the gears of the projector and recording device. In fact, if you had more than one actor who needed to record dialogue, you would need to create the loop twice, including the film, since each recording only accommodated one track. As time passed, technology evolved, and so too did the ways in which filmmakers were using sound. The most notable event in film history to influence sound was the introduction of the Motion Picture Production Code, otherwise known as the Hays Code. The Hays Code was, plain and simple, censorship. It was designed to enforce moral standards. Named after Will H. Hays, it prohibited content like profanity, nudity, graphic violence, and sexual perversion to avoid government censorship and maintain Hollywood's public image. This meant that filmmakers needed to find ways to use sound to suggest, with more subtlety, events occurring in their films. Instead of seeing a violent car crash, you might hear it off camera. Instead of showing overt sexuality, you might use a musical cue to suggest romance between two characters.
What have you been doing all this time?
Playing with a jigsaw puzzle?
If you could have found out what that rosebud meant, I bet that would have explained everything.
No, I don't think so. No. Mr. Kane was a man who got everything he wanted and then lost it.
Famously, Orson Welles' Citizen Kane in 1941 pushed filmmaking boundaries in not just camera work, but in sound design. Welles' background was in radio, and he took many of his learnings and applied them to his iconic movie. Some of the more commonly credited successes include overlapping dialogue, creating more natural speaking, unlike the more theatrical performances in other films.
You're the dramatic critic, Leland. That's
You
enough.
still eating?
I'm still hungry. Now look, Mr. Carter, here's a front-page story in the Chronicle about a Mrs. Harry Silverstone in Brooklyn who's missing. Now, she's probably murdered. And here's a picture of her in the Chronicle. Why isn't there something about it in the Inquirer?
Because we're running a newspaper.
Joseph, I'm
Not a
absolutely
scandal sheet.
starving
Oh,
to
well,
arrest
yes,
this
Mr.
lady and get
Bernstein,
some. No, I'm
that's
very
all
hungry.
right.
Look,
Well-
Mr. Carter, here is a 3-column headline in the Chronicle. Why hasn't the Inquirer a 3-column headline?
Sound bridges, or lightning mixes, created a seamless transition from one scene to another. Nowadays, you might hear this referred to as an L-cut or a J-cut, but in a world before non-linear editing tools, that terminology did not yet make sense.
495,000. But Mr. Kane, look who's working for the Chronicle. With them fellas, it's no trick to get circulation.
You're right, Mr. Bernstein.
You know how long it took the Chronicle to get that staff together? 20 years.
20 years. Well?
6 years ago, I looked at a picture of the world's greatest newspapermen. I felt like a kid in front of a candy store. Well, tonight, 6 years later, I got my candy. All of it.
This would begin an era of innovation in sound technology. From the early 1940s until the late 1960s, the stranglehold that the film studios had on the industry was waning due to the landmark Supreme Court case United States versus Paramount Pictures. This case brought an end to studios acting as both production companies and distributors, owning their own theater chains. As a result, audiences were seeing fewer films in theaters because technology had entered the home, and sound technology was advancing rapidly. Recording devices became smaller and more portable. This was known as the magnetic era of sound recording, which utilized magnetic tape. The new technologies allowed for stereo playback of recordings and the ability to record multiple tracks at once. Sound recordings were becoming clearer, cleaner, and closer to reality. It was during this time that movies like On the Waterfront and Psycho would be released. You can see that the stilted actor blocking from the 1930s is gone, and both the actors and the camera are in motion.
You don't have to be afraid of me. I'm not going to bite you. I guess they don't let you walk with fellas where you've been, huh?
You know how the sisters are.
Yeah. Are you training to be a nun?
It's just a regular college.
What is it?
It's run by the Sisters of St. Anne.
Where is that?
Sound design was becoming more subtle and nuanced, and the technology only continued to improve. Orson Welles once again innovated with his iconic opening shot for Touch of Evil, a nearly 3-minute, unbroken, single take that uses sound effects to heighten the tension of an exploding bomb.
Mike, do you realize this is the very first time we've been together in my country?
Do you realize I haven't kissed you in over an hour?
So that brings us to the end of part 1. We've looked at how screen sound evolved from the silent era through the rise of synchronized sound and into the major innovations that shaped Hollywood through the mid-20th century. In part 2, we're going to pick things up in the 1970s and look at how sound design entered the modern era. All right, I'll see you in a bit.